Hi, and welcome to the Intellectual Adventure Podcast. Today, we're here with a new adventure for you. We have Chad, Jeff, Cap, and Liam joining us today on this show, along with myself. And we are excited to get into an interesting point of time and the past. We want to explore the narrative of experiencing a period of time that we aren't a part of and what we would want to experience and why. So while we dive into these points, we are going to go ahead and get introduced for the day and start in the comments. So Chad, do you have anything you want to start and introduce for the day? Are you excited for today's show?
Yes, I'm actually very excited. I do really enjoy history topics, whether it's natural history, human history. I really like it all. I've been really thinking a lot about on what I would actually like to experience, and I keep sort of coming back to something in prehistory, such as like Cambrian or Ordovician, just to be able to see and experience all the different types of animals and different types of flora and fauna that we can't see today. That's sort of what I just tended to gravitate towards when thinking about this topic.
No, I think that's a great one. Yeah, vegetation's not even something I quite considered in my period, at least. But I think that's a great point. Like, I know science. That's one point I think will be prominent in our answers is scientific study. You know, at least observing or listening to things or feeling things of that time. Mm-hmm. All these are very interesting. But Liam, what about you? What are you excited for today?
I'm actually really excited to hear what everyone else has got to say about different points in history. And I can't wait actually just talk about different stages of human evolution. I'd like to see different things that changed, like the Industrial Revolution or whatever.
Oh, very interesting. Jeff, what about you today?
Well, I'm kind of happy to be where I am in this day and age. When I was younger, I wished I'd been born earlier, maybe 10 years earlier or something like that, because, I like the music, but I'm pretty comfortable where I'm at right now.
No, I'm glad to hear that. And that's an interesting perspective. That really makes me excited that we all so far have very different takes on the question. As for myself, I'm more in tune with visiting the Renaissance. I think that period of time would be extremely exciting. And there's, it inspired me to look more into it because the Renaissance is kind of a confusing era.
It really is.
Yeah, there's so much about it that actually transpired towards the modern age. Not all of it, The styles, of course, are very distinct for that period of time. But it is interesting to see how music changed, how instruments changed, and various other things I'll point out later. But Cap, what about you?
I'm actually, mainly because I'm disabled, I'm interested in seeing how throughout the years the effect people with disabilities have had on the different eras. Because like how it was 1,000 years ago, 500 years ago, 100 years ago is different than what it is today.
Yeah, and the different tech and implements and surgeries going on. I mean, some of that stuff even within like Civil War era of the U.S. history that I've studied about the medical techniques.
Like if I was born in the Civil War era, I wouldn't be alive today.
Wow.
Because the tech they had back then is not what it is today.
I believe it, though. I mean, there was so much that changed over the world wars, even like blood transfusions and things of that nature.
Plastic surgery.
Yeah, plastic surgery is a great one. The medical field's brutal. I don't know what other way. It blows my mind. I wanted to dive into the armory with these points and see if there's any resources that each of us brought to field today, or if there's any points that we specifically wanted to point out in our discussions and see how we align. So we're going to go ahead and start with Jeff. Jeff, do you have any details about what you're going to dive into?
Well, as far as where I'm at today and all that, I'm working through the loss of someone close, which is difficult, especially as you're going through the house and picking things up that used to be theirs, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of retrospective, inner speculation, ask myself, where am I going from here? Or am I going anywhere? Or do I just stay here and continue as I was, but just alone? So it's, I'm at kind of a crossroads. I can go down many different side roads from here. But I'm not sure at this moment what that path is going to take.
That's a very real point to elaborate and dive into today. I commend you for being willing to talk about it, because that's I know that's not easy, and it being such a recent undertaking and change. So we're excited to, I believe, hear about your point and why being in the present is good for you. And Liam, what about you?
I'm going to be just going over some World War II things that I'll dig into in a couple of minutes later on. But it's going to be from 1932 to 1945. So
okay,
find out why would Germany, like the rise of fascism, why would people turn to such an extreme point of view? So I'm going to go over that.
Chad, what about yourself?
My biggest time that I would really want to kind of focus on specifically is sort of that prehistory around when there were major evolutionary changes happening within. Mine's not always fair because it's a little spread out, but because I'd love to be able to just look at some of those things unfold, like Tiktaalik coming onto land. I'd love to be that would be one that I would love to be able to see and experience, is to watch like a little fish just kind of crawl itself onto land, and other specific things like that, of where things that we cannot see through the fossil record, because there's lots of things that just are mysteries, but to be able to visit would answer so many questions. And not just to be able to see and experience it, but just to answer scientific questions like that, just to me would be amazing to see those things.
Yeah, I agree. That would be super fascinating. And
yeah, sort of Cambrian, Ordovician kind of time, and even Carboniferous, because there was a lot of really amazing things happening in the Carboniferous, such as that. I mean, mammals practically didn't even exist. It was really just a lot of competition between large insects and giant amphibians. I mean, God, it gets me going. It really gets me interesting. This was a good topic for me.
Yeah. No, from my studies of geology, I know there's so much fascination when it comes to the layers of the Earth and uncovering what history or what organisms just existed at that time, and the fact that we're still finding more and more each day. Especially this year, we found a lot of new species.
Yeah, that's an amazing aside to the fossil record. Is some people think that we have a pretty good idea of everything that was around at any given time, but realistically, for a fossil to form is so rare that we really only know like a tiny slice of the pie as to what's actually out there. We really only have a fraction of the amount of species that actually lived.
Yeah.
I mean, think about how diverse the planet is right now, and the planet has been practically that diverse. It's had ups and downs, but it's always had some large level of diversity that we're not always privy to, because we can only look at bones and only look at what actually fossilizes, which is a very rare process.
Yeah, I would agree. The fact that you can find different regions still, with like different valleys and such that have dips and concaves of fossils that appear from old lakes, old seas. I always find that interesting as someone who's digging for crystals and things in sediment. Well, I guess that puts it on my point here, which is the Renaissance. And I really want to get into the philosophy, the art, the music of the time, as many fundamental changes occurred during that time. And then the designs of the clothing, the locations of the time, like the fortifications by the stonemasons, and not just the fortifications, the churches and what have you, but the foods and the inventions, especially those of the mechanical sort that were the parapet contraptions or the gatehouse fortifications. And really, I'll dive into why it's basically my deep fascination with the medieval culture, and especially the transition out and how they innovated changes to tie in the industrial age with the medieval times. And from that, what still stands in the modern culture, especially from like food and music, because we can all identify at least something from that period. That's at least how I feel. It's a very universal time of innovation. And I think that's going to be a fun one to bring up with you guys. So
it really is a major transition.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, and there's so much going on. And I mean, realistically, between 200 years, which in that time, that's not that long. But you can see how tech advanced. As tech advances, tech just advances quicker and a little quicker. Mm-hmm. And that's definitely an effect that we feel today. Now, Cap, as for you, what do you think you're going to dive into today?
That's a tough one because there's so many different things that I like and don't like. I'll probably dig into the pirate era a little bit.
Nice.
Mainly because I like pirates.
Do you have a distinct pirate era in mind? Because there's technically a few phases of the pirate age.
Yeah, one could even consider the Viking era a pirate age. I mean, that's pretty much piracy.
Yeah. I really, maybe a little bit of everything. I'm not really sure. It'll just depend on what pops up in the conversation.
Right.
No, that's fair. A fun fact I actually just discovered last night was the culture of the Cossacks. And they basically ran the wild east of the world of that time, which was originally the Golden Horde's territory, which was remnants of the Mongols. They got hit by one of these invading forces. That essentially this guy went around, and I learned about him recently too. He went around the Baltic and Caspian area and just completely thrashed pretty much everyone that he ran into, and ended up going into the Ottoman territory and destroying the Ottoman army that just destroyed the Polish army that basically stopped Europe from invading to try to conquer Ottoman territory for 100+ years, something like that. There's a whole story there, but this one guy just went around and like conquered like a ton of places, and he would have gone down to India and China and tried to do what Alexander was doing, but he died at old age. But some consider him one of the greatest like generals of that era, which I thought was interesting because you don't really hear much about him other than I mean, just lost to time, right? Like there's so much warfare history out there, and specifically with tacticians that even just fell in battle, and because they were told to be a certain place at the wrong time. It's just it's a very interesting type of history. That's
I wonder if we have a really good understanding of, tactical battle history because those things were so readily saved and talked about, because to build on other people's tactics is a pretty big part of warfare, to be able to remember, hey, this worked at this time, it will probably work in the future. So I wonder if that's why we have such a great record of different battles and different conflicts that we keep with us to this day and continue to learn about.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No,
I never really
I
thought
think
about
so.
it like that, but that makes sense.
One of my arguments for this is, and I'm not just relaying the Bible here to just present war history, but there is war history in the Bible as well, where the Israelites were basically reliant on the worship of, I believe it was Moses, or no, it might have. I don't think it was, because Moses didn't enter the promised land. So it's it was one of the judges, I think, of Israel, but he was basically on a mountaintop, and like the louder he would shout, the better they were doing in the warfare.
Oh, I know who that is. I just can't think of
Yeah,
the name.
and I can't remember the name. It's a very famous story though, but that's my point, is even in that, like, that shows the Israelite culture that, hey, if you worship, if you push towards this hope, like this is going to benefit your combat. Like that to me is like why they also recorded that, is to a degree it's a morale thing. It's keeping the people going. Mm-hmm. At the very bare minimum of it.
Yeah,
and
it's
not like that's. Yeah, and it's not like the Bible's the only book out there that transcribes combat or combat context, like the Art of War. Obvious a source right there that people still daily read.
It's still pertinent.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's still viable. It
was a brilliant manuscript.
Yeah, there's a reason it's called the Art of War. I truly believe in that. Like, you can be a good general. That does exist. Like, there is a difference between a good and a bad general. And calling defeat, calling a spade sometimes is what it takes to be right in some warfare situations. But man, that was a long one.
That was practically its own little rabbit hole. That was great. Well, it's not. We're talking about history. It's perfect.
Oh, I know. This is we're getting ready. But yes, Jeff.
If I could expand on just the Art of War, it was an amazing manuscript because it was not only a field commander, but it was penned kind of an analyzation of the entire technique of war and what works, what doesn't, and that kind of thing. It was an analyzation that hadn't been put down on paper, and they may have been thoughts in commanders' heads, but they weren't put down as a manual or something like that.
I think that I agree with what you're saying here. It may have been a stretch of the imagination of what's going on within that time of warfare. It's like kind of the Roman imperialism. Like there's some history of Rome that you just can't fully trust because it's written by victors, just quite frankly. and there's a lot of cultures that they didn't like. And that, like the Goths, there's a Goths, like all that Gothic history in general, it's a total misconception on most parts, because the Gothic culture is very artistic. It wasn't just cryptic and dark. So I find that kind of stuff interesting, how it's perceived from old transcripts.
Yeah, Egypt used to do that too in like the Babylonian era. Is they would lose a battle, but they would just write that they won. And at the time, their empire was so big that nobody would even question it. And so there's a lot of Egyptian victories inside of history and inside of the Bible that may or may not have really even happened at all.
That's really interesting. But that brings up a good point. Like, who controls the media controls the power. And I think that stays true in the modern age. So,
and back then it was criers. It wasn't printed material either. They didn't have the screens. They didn't have the printing presses. It was all one person about whether they won or not, and going from town to town.
Yeah, all word of mouth. It's interesting. Yeah. Different news could have spread in different directions. News of a loss could have spread to one region, and news of a win could have spread to another region at that time.
Yep.
Yeah, no. Reputation in those times of these nations really mattered. Like, that's something I think we really have fallen out of touch with, is diplomacy in the modern age. What it means to really be a world on the world stage. Like, even at that time when there wasn't access to internet, there wasn't access to these global networks of communication that we have. At least on this instantaneous or semi-instantaneous plane, we basically don't understand that affecting cultures that aren't necessarily as in touch with technology as we are in the first world situations, it kind of creates this natural divide of understanding. Like, we don't necessarily understand why these people value just being educated, or like in a small grade school. Or I'm just saying, like, an example that's more extreme opposite, where there's not a lot. There's a small village, but there's a lot of people collected, and the community is the network. That's why those people are happy, because they learn to build knowledge between each other in like a natural, cohesive experience. That's why I think podcasting could be so entertaining, because it's almost emulating that cohesion of like coming together to educate and make it through a situation using what we know between ourselves. It's weird how I'm putting it, but the art of trying to lead people into solutions is, I think, something that isn't as talked about in the modern age, because they're afraid of losing power to those people. It's like Napoleon. Think about Napoleon. Napoleon went into a region and did build things that helped that region. And I'm not saying he didn't destroy things either, but he was also respected because he was able and capable of doing these good things, these implementations, infrastructure building. So Cyrus the Great and leaders like that did the same thing. Alexander the Great. Yes, Chad.
Oh, I was just going to say just the fact that leaders like that are willing to advocate, no matter what their actual goal is that they're advocating for their ideas, and they're advocating for the ideas of people who follow them, and that's why people follow them. And so that advocation, that kind of an advocation actually is what drives that kind of those kinds of positive things that can come out of the violence. And we can see various forms of that to this day, preserved in history. It's hard for me to come up with an exact example, but I'm sure you guys can think of many examples when I say that of something really positive that came out of violence.
Yeah.
or conquest.
Yeah. No. And it's just a fact that warfare has bred us technologies that we didn't necessarily have
Drives innovation.
drives to create, you know, like look at some of the, if you don't believe me, look at some of the technology there's drafted for Vietnam. There's some crazy stuff. I didn't even believe it, but they have like
M16 AR-15 that is still one of the most relevant small arms today. I mean, that was innovated for the Vietnam War.
No, that's very
There's
true.
tons of examples people don't think about.
Also, I want to welcome in Elijah to the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. Now that I'm awake, I had to go outside and get under the hose to wake myself up.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, woke up and saw your text. I'm like, oh, I'm late. Perfect.
Hey, it's totally fine. It's you know, we're all kind of taking it easy today, and we're just kind of going through our introductions here on what we're going to dive into on today's subject. I don't know if you got a chance to check out the subject for today, but I can go ahead and read it off to you. What time period would you want to experience and why?
And
is that the only question? Yeah, that's the only question.
Yeah, it's pretty open-ended.
Oh yeah, that's why we're kind of here talking about war history, because I totally derailed the conversation. But the point we're at right now is the armory. So the way this works is you go ahead and list any resources or like things in your mind that like points, staple points that you're going to dive into on your topic. So if, say, for instance, you want to talk about the Stone Age, maybe you're talking about the weapons of that time and the animals of that time. So that would be something you're arming your conversation with before we dive in and have deeper talks.
Interesting. I guess off the top of my head would be I'd really want to go back to Native American times and live at some point there. And reason being, I mean, especially like now times would be appropriate with how society is going and terribly, you know, and see how they did it, you know, and they still warred, but they got along pretty well and were a pretty thriving civilization, even though, you know, we supposedly saw them as savages, whatever, you know. But I think they had.
That's very great.
Yeah, I think they had their finger on the spiritual pulse. You know what I mean? They knew how to find balance a little better than we are today, and you know, I think they thrived. So it'd be interesting.
I would agree with that. That's actually a good one. I like that.
Yeah, I think every civilization has highs and lows, you know, and there was definitely differences still. In as much as I respect the Native American culture, if I really look at all the cultures I've studied, it's a matter of the struggle between men and women still, and that's the type of struggle I still see with it. And having studied like Cossack culture, and I was just explaining this yesterday, that the interesting thing about the Cossacks is they gave women complete power in the household, and
interesting.
That was one of the reasons that their culture thrived so much, was because they were one of the only Slavic nations of that time, groups of that time that really allowed that dynamic, and they thrived through their warfare. They thrived through their industry, through their notability, and it's not to say that this didn't happen between Native American cultures, but that's my point. There's like different cultures that have various themes like that, and that's the part that I think is less talked about in broad history of how
you can track
this
that.
Is a reasonable point. Like they had reasonable points, and yeah, you can track that. So I think it's a very fascinating point to be made to want to visit that time, and I don't shun that at all. I think that's wonderful.
Nice. Yeah, I totally agree with the I think it's really interesting that you're focusing a lot on the dynamic between male and female in cultures, because I totally agree. That's going to have a really big impact on so much, including the development of the next generations and whatnot, and how that becomes well, again, we're dealing with that now in our society, the broken wound of mother and father upon children. And we've got like massive amounts of people going to therapy continually because now you've got to work out what you went through as a kid. And even if you weren't, sexually abused or any of the big traumas, you still have this massive trauma of disconnect between male and female in the household. Even if they're both still there, I'm going through it right now, my wife and I, it's a difficult dynamic to figure out who's in control, the balance, just call it the balance, and it's very important. You don't want to have anybody feeling oppressed or used or unheard, so that's pretty cool. I'm gonna have to check that out. You said the Cossack, yeah?
Yeah, the Slavic Cossacks. I'll type it out for you too. And Conestoga man has a good question, I think, to dive into before we get into our trial grounds of today, the bulk of the discussion. So he's asking, Conestoga man.
Yes. Which of the tribes are you interested in? And because there's differences between the main branches, I would say. I grew up in the Midwest with the First Peoples, and then I interacted with the Sioux, and I'm really interested in the culture of like the Hopis and the American Southwest Indians, which are a little bit different. So
that's interesting. Personally,
and then there's Florida with the Blackfoot and stuff like that.
Okay. I am Choctaw myself, so I'm just out of personal interest. That's where I'd want to go explore. Mm-hmm. But I'm open to the knowledge of all the tribes and how they interacted and how maybe even some of them didn't interact. Or there's some who didn't know about each other even though they were in the same continent.
Mm-hmm. And there's others that traded heavily with each other too.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Now, the Choctaw, you said, was who you are related to?
Yeah, my great-grandfather, full-blood Choctaw.
What region is the Choctaw?
Mississippi area.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I hadn't personally heard of the tribe because Mississippi is one of those areas I honestly don't know that much American history on. I mean, we all know America's huge, the North American continent, that is. So
a lot going on.
Yeah.
No, I've been to Alaska too, and the Indian culture up there is still very strong.
Yeah. Now, Alaskan Native Americans are we talking about Inuit or is there other tribes up in Alaska?
The Inuit are up there, and there's a few others as well.
Okay, cool.
I originally got interested in their boat building, their canoe
Oh,
building.
wow.
Because they flex so that they'll go over a wave easier.
That's really interesting.
I took a trip up there, and I spent almost 2 weeks up there.
Mm-hmm.
Did the Inside Passage and stuff like that.
That's cool.
And stopped along the way, and it was very interesting. I really liked it.
That is really cool. And I hope, I didn't come across as trying to be bashing on Native Americans for that dynamic. But as far as what I see in modern politics and for what we perceive history looking back on, the way I view it is that dynamic totally had to have had an effect on Europeans coming in because of the difference of how we wanted our freedoms and how we viewed these different dynamics we didn't understand. I think a lot of it was just personal ignorance. A lot of people weren't educated on that. How could they have known? And they were brought into a region that they were told to defend themselves and keep themselves at the ready, for the quote unquote savage. So
right,
it's a terrible misunderstanding of history. That's how I perceive it. And it's like the Mountain Maidu that Jeff and I are both familiar with. Like there's people that I've talked to actively there that were like trying to work on projects to help benefit these peoples today, because of the damage done. But the healing nature that they provided to the forest in that region and to the land of that region, and the way they tended and cared, like those are highlights that people should be educated on, and those people should gain respect for.
Yeah. My interest right now, just with where I'm at in life, is more on a spiritual level, because I think that's kind of the roots and the basis for a lot of what you see is manifest out into society. Like even if we're talking about a broad topic of politics, because that's what's going on right now. I think we see from a deterioration of connection to spirit, we see that manifest in just wild and open, unregulated people, in our systems, and that's what we're seeing a lot of, and it causes a lot of problems. So that's what I'd want to sit down and talk to some elders about. Their rituals of manhood and things like that, of coming into these new understandings as we age and so on and so forth. So we've really gotten away from that, so.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point to be had, is the understanding of what it means to take on responsibilities of adulthood. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of cultural differences there, and that must have, I would imagine, must have definitely varied between tribes commonly on what they perceived as manhood, or the trial to manhood.
Right.
But that's also the beauty of it. It's much like the pantheons of old, with the Greeks and the Romans, and what you do, what your dedication is, connected.
Yeah, and it seems like we're missing it in this time of that. The beauty of our diversity in our country comes with some caveats. So there are some cultures in our country who definitely still persist in that, and you see the benefits of that. But great and large, you've got a lot of us young kids growing up, and the video game box was the guide, or you might have seen something on a movie that was helpful, with some sort of growth or anything. But any sort of pattern, we don't have it as much anymore. It's interesting, and for women especially too. Speaking as a man, but don't want to leave that out. It's the guidance for young women as they go into that whirlwind of becoming a woman, the emotional turmoil and load that they carry. It's like a lot of us are walking along like we're just alone with this thing on our back, and should talk about it more.
Yeah, and it's a fairly over-sexualized society too. I mean, for women. I mean, when you, or like objectification. It's an objectification of the family unit. I feel like that's partly what the struggle between society and the internet is right now.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
Disillusioned. A lot of people are disillusioned with what it takes to build that kind of connection. Mm-hmm. And Chad, did you have a point you wanted to bring up?
Yeah, I was going to say something, but my mic was accidentally muted. But because I really liked that we were talking about a little earlier, we were talking about sort of some of the traditions, and I really wanted to specifically mention that a lot of Native American culture is based on oral tradition, and I think a lot of that oral tradition is being lost, but I don't think it should be, because I think there's lots of ways, especially what I like is ways to teach values to our children. Like, I think a lot of us were raised with different types of values. Like, I wasn't necessarily raised Christian, but I was raised with Christian values versus I think it'd be interesting if we were able to bring some of the Native American values through their storytelling and spoken word. And I feel like it should almost have a larger place inside of our society, of where we're not only getting, books about what Jesus taught us, but we should be getting books about what the Native Americans taught and had taught for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
Because it's valuable, and it's in such a nice format of a creative, interesting, and beautiful story. And I think that's something that I would love to teach to my kids, and I think more people should, to just get more perspective on everything.
For sure.
Yeah. No, I love this. And I honestly want to get us going into our main discussion because I think we're armed. I think we have some good points to talk on, and yeah, I'm excited to get into our individual points. And Elijah, you'll catch on as we go. I think you're gonna enjoy what's about to transpire here with more tangents on the way. Yeah.
Real quick, I have to get to Harveston. It's about 10 o'clock, so I got to kind of bounce out of here in like 30 minutes. It's just put that out there. How long do you usually run for?
Oh, well, honestly, yeah, that varies, but we'll go ahead and stick you right after Jeff because Jeff has to go at 10. So, or you know what? We'll actually put you first. If if you want to go ahead and dive into your.
I haven't prepared a lot.
No, that's okay. That's okay. Then you can just join along in the other discussions after your main points.
I'll catch on to how it's going. I feel like that's kind of what just happened as I talked about the Native Americans.
We started discussing a lot.
Yeah.
No, and if you're content right now, I mean, that was a lot, and I think I think
we could count that as yours, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. The only thing I would add as a rebuttal to it is, what do you think of the styles of that time? You know, the different decor and colors and fabrics and weaving. I mean, the weaving techniques even.
It's outstanding. Iconic and very they're very nature oriented. You know, they're very, very connected. You know, like right now we disconnect. You know, we go into our boxes when the connection is right outside. And we go into our box and we connect with our internet, and it's a different kind of connection. You know, it's its own thing. I don't want to poo-poo on what we do too much, you know, but just to see the difference and to see how important it is. You know, I think there's a lot of people going fully disconnected from Mother Earth, you know, in cities and whatnot. You get a whole different dynamic from it. Whereas the Native Americans, you know, it was paramount to stay connected because it was, you know, Mother Earth provided, you know.
It was their whole life.
It was their whole life, yeah. And the balance of it was really amazing. And the style goes right in with their values and how their style basically ended up being connected to the fact that they used everything. So their style was the hides on the animal that they ate, you know, and I think that's pretty neat. There's something to that.
One of my favorite parts of going across the U.S. On Route 66, at least a part of it on the southern end, was going through New Mexico and Arizona area, checking out the different art of those travel centers and the Native American centers.
Outstanding.
It's just outstanding. It's a great word for it. Like my absolute favorite type of art from those situations is the horsehair pottery, where they burn the horsehair and it leaves lines that are naturally like etched into the pot.
That's cool.
It just, you should definitely look it up if any of you or any of the viewers haven't seen the art. I would highly recommend it. It's gorgeous and all made by hand.
A note that I really like is I always just love looking at not just clothing as a whole, but specifically material of clothing, the different types of textiles that were used. I mean, it's interesting because they didn't have straight up, you know, wool or animals or very specific ways to produce lots and lots of textiles. And so it's really interesting to look, especially across the whole United States, of where on the West Coast, especially where I'm from, up in Oregon, it's, you know, there's just not a lot of materials that are really conducive to that. So you would see, especially on the coast, a lot of people that are just wearing woven bark, you know, bark that's been stripped and made into a fibrous, weavable material. But then the material for clothing across the Midwest and to the East Coast just gets more and more different. Some places have better skins for making clothing. Some places have other types of materials for making better textiles. Like one example that I really like, it's harder to really pin down where exactly this was. I'm pretty sure it was up in the Saskatchewan area of Canada, but there was actually a specific type of dog that was bred because Native Americans had dogs, and dogs were a major part of their tool arsenal. And they actually specifically bred a type of dog to grow really long hair so that they could make certain types of textiles and blankets that needed to be softer out of this hair off of their own dog. Except because all these dogs were pre-contact from the West, or excuse me, from Europeans coming in, when the Europeans brought their dogs, almost all pre-contact, in fact, actually practically all pre-contact dogs went extinct. And so we only have certain record of those long-haired dogs and of various pre-contact dogs because they went extinct so quickly and interbred with the European dogs. And so now that part of Native American history has been largely lost just because of how quickly it happened.
That's interesting. Never heard that before.
Yeah, I
look
didn't
up
know that either.
pre-contact dogs. Pre-contact dogs is a really interesting topic about a part of Native American history that was very important that kind of got whitewashed and forgotten just because of the other conflicts that were happening at the time.
Right. Wow, that is really interesting.
Oh, thank you for sharing that, Chad.
Yeah.
Oh, you're welcome.
And the different regions in America the tribes had a different base dog for their own needs.
Yeah,
like,
right.
Like the Inuits, they bred the Huskies, just for pulling sleds and doing work,
Yeah. Those are some of the last dogs that still have pre-contact DNA inside of them, believe it or not.
That's wild.
Those Huskies and Malamutes. So you can see the DNA of the pre-contact dogs.
I would love to get a professor friend of mine. I had him on the World Networking podcast, Tom Heaney. He does U.S. history and U.S. Native American history. And it would be interesting to see if he knows anything about this subject and further into these subjects. I think that would be a fun one, especially knowing that you're...
Oh, no, go ahead.
Oh, just especially knowing that you're interested in this, Elijah, too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I used to have a American Eskimo dog. I had him for 14 years. I found him on the streets of the city. He found me, actually. He came up to me and said he wanted to be taken home. I thought he was a black dog until I washed him up.
Oh, wow.
Glistening white, yeah.
Oh, wow. That's funny.
That's incredible.
That was probably a surprise.
Yeah. The American Eskimo was supposed to be the prototype dog for the curly tail dogs. Like the sled dogs and stuff like that with the upright curly tail.
Interesting.
Yeah, really interesting. No, and Chad, did you have a point you wanted to dive on?
I was just going to say that I wish I had better specifics of region and perhaps name of the dog, but I just don't quite have those on hand. But again, you can look up pre-contact dogs, and it's its own. Oh, look at that dog.
That's adorable.
It took me a long time to name him. I named him Spirit.
Nice.
Spirit, I like that.
Very appropriate.
And here's a picture of us together. I was a little younger.
Oh, wow.
Then.
Oh, my gosh, Jeff, the turtleneck. Oh, man.
What is that, 86? Come on.
That's
early 90s.
Right there.
That's early 90s right there.
Early 90s.
Man, I love this. That's great.
He was my buddy for 14 years.
Nice.
Now I got a Jack Russell Terrier.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Rosie. You should show us Rosie, actually. Where's she at?
She's in the sunspot over there.
Oh, is she? Yeah, she's content.
She likes the sunspot.
Keeping warm.
Well, let's go ahead and dive into Jeff's points here on his era of choice. What era would you like to experience and why, Jeff?
I'm happy in this era right here. There's so much new things coming. There's as we've gone through history, we've experienced war continuously. So it's not like anything is new in that regard today. But there are a lot of people who would think that they could run the world and want to fit everybody into a little box. and control you and track you. And, if you don't behave, then they're going to punish you in one way or another, So I think part of that is the digital economy coming out, where they can just turn your money off electronically. The 15-minute cities, they want to take everybody out of the, they want to take them away from nature and pack them into boxes, basically.
They want to compact them even further.
Well, I mean, and you would need permission to go outside the perimeter of your 15-minute city. And if you weren't behaving, and drinking the company Kool-Aid, then they wouldn't even let you out to go travel, the whatever, how many ever times they allow people to travel during a year, and they're pushing this whole thing under the whole climate change scam. And it's they're using the media as propaganda tools because people are so tuned into the television and the movies and stuff like that they throw something in there, a flash that you don't even recognize, but it works on your subconscious mind.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I like this era here because I see, even if it's just passing memes on, that I can help take, help people to experience what's going on around them. Like I've been looking at I think it's an osprey that has moved in. They come every fall, and then the red-tailed hawks fight with them because it's their territory. So I have this show outside my window, and I don't need the television. I haven't watched television since 1983 when cable wanted me to pay for the commercials. I said, no, the only reason I had cable is because I wasn't watching commercials. So I'm living life here. I learned to fly a plane. I like hot rods, antique hot rods, doesn't matter what year, I like horse-drawn buggies, some of the earliest vehicles were a horse-drawn buggy that they turned into electric vehicles. They've had electric vehicles since the 1800s. There's nothing new there, but they're pushing it as a climate change. And we have to go that way, and it's only going to benefit the people that are building the electric cars and the people that are pushing the rules because they get the kickbacks and stuff like that. So,
yeah,
there's something to be said about pushing people out of rural communities, or trying to scale back support of the rural dynamic, like farming, because they want to take land. Ultimately, people want those resources. Yeah, it's a real thing. I mean, water's one of the biggest ones. If there's
they want to tell the farmers
water,
they can't plant anything, and then they want to put solar panels all over the place. And so, that's a single crop. It only grows once. Gets damaged by hail, tornadoes and stuff.
Yeah.
Then you can't use the land anymore. You can't plant anything on it. It becomes poison from all the panels, the pieces. So I don't know.
There's work that needs done.
There's a lot of work that needs done, and a lot of it, and I see evidence of a lot of people starting to see what's really going on in the background. Like I've been watching the planes with the trails since the 90s when I saw one do a high-speed U-turn. It's like, well, if it was having an emergency, there's 3 major airports within 10 miles where I was standing. 2 of them were military bases, and one of them was Sac Metro Field. And this thing it was a large airplane, did a high-speed U-turn, which is a military maneuver. It's anything over 45-degree bank angle on a wing is an aerobatic maneuver, and you don't just do that with a jetliner full of people. Everybody be screaming their ass off. So
luggage is falling out. Yeah,
I knew once I saw that and it didn't go into any of those 3 airports to land, so I knew it wasn't an emergency, and it didn't have passengers, and so that's I don't know. I've been aware of things that most people aren't for quite some time. That was like 1992, where I realized the planes are spraying this stuff. I knew about HARP before that. You all know about HARP?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, it's
altitude, active oil. energized ionospheres.
Yeah, no,
So,
there's a lot going on there.
Jeff, I hear the concern and the some of the pitfalls we're having in today's time era. Is there a side that you look at that is hopeful?
I do see more and more people talking about it, more and more people finding ways to communicate about it. It's not this secret program that nobody speaks about and calls you crazy for even thinking that they could do something like that. You know, I know the first experiments for cloud seeding on an airplane were in the 1920s. So they used it extensively through World War II and Korean and Vietnam Wars. So that's long before I ever was born. They've been using weather modification techniques. So they're really good at it by now.
Sure.
And I was laser technology as well. That's a military tool. They use that. They have directed energy weapons. Some of them are lasers and some of them are like microwaves where they'll turn on a microwave in front of a crowd and the people will literally start to cook the people and they disperse. It's a dispersing aid and you can't see it. You just feel it.
Yeah. Start throwing up and,
and sonic weapons as well. They'll use that to make people nauseous and stuff like that.
Yeah. They've got some sound ability to put it right in your ear too. Direct sound beam to your ear. Freak you the fuck out.
They can actually put thoughts into your head today. Yeah. You can hear music in your head. You don't need headphones. They can just, and it's only you're going to hear it, because they target it directly to a person.
Yeah, that's spooky. But
Operation Mockingbird comes to mind on that.
Well, and let's not get too far into the military hole before we get onto Liam's point, because Liam also wanted to dive into an era that has a lot to do with these kinds of advances, and I'm very curious to see what you bring up, Liam.
Yeah, I even just talking about lasers there. I don't know if anyone heard of the Death Star project by the U.S. military.
Yeah.
Reagan's
little bucket list.
Yeah.
I
thank God it was cancelled, but that we know of anyway.
But no, what era would you like to experience and why, Liam?
So for me, I picked 1932 to 1945, and I feel like I'm going to give a bit of context beforehand. 1923, the beer hall putsch happens. The small Nazi party in Germany that was relevant in 1923 has a failed coup in a putsch. Hitler was there. Hitler was put in jail. Hitler writes his novel Mein Kampf, and then 1932, he kind of is more known. He basically is like the Hindenburg goes, well, these guys have a problem. The prime minister at the time, don't know his name, but he goes, let's give Hitler the role of chancellor. He'll make a mess of it, and he'll become irrelevant. And it very much wasn't the case. He managed to. It's mental what he's managed to do. Like, my whole thing is, how did he manage to persuade the German people to declare support World War II and to go against different races, like the Jewish population, the blacks, anyone who's disabled. It's just mental how he managed to basically twist people's minds into following this hive mind type thing. But it's even mental, like the Nuremberg rallies. Like, I don't know if anyone, as people have seen pictures of Nuremberg rallies, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's just mental.
Yeah.
Like, tons of soldiers lined up, burning urns. Like, in history, like, I'm studying history at the moment, and they literally had searchlights up in the sky. It's like, as if, it's like just kind of going around, looking around the sky. And then when Hitler comes on stage, like all the lights are focused on one man. And that's like whoever's speaking. And it's mostly Hitler who's speaking. And it would almost make him look like a god, the German people.
Yeah.
And it's like a whole thing of just like, this man is a god, believe everything he says. Like they even made radios affordable for the everyday people, and it would only be propaganda from the Nazi party that would be playing. And even just like, he never married. Like he married 2 weeks before the end of World War II, before he committed suicide. But it's like the whole thing of him not being married was like, I'm married to Germany. I can't, like, I'm married to Germany. I won't, I'm here to save the German people. And like, then like we have Knights with Long Knives. Like he goes around, kills all of his allies. Well, people who he thinks are going to turn against him. Even his best friend, who he met in the Beer Hall Putsch, he kills him. And like a fun fact about that is his best friend, when they committed the Knights with Long Knives, he was found with a boy in his bed. Like he was gay. And he just, Hitler was like, Jesus, that's perfect. Like, and he does propaganda. Another thing to turn people against the gays. Like, it's just mental.
Wow.
And then like we got Kristallnacht, which is in English it's the Night of Broken Glass, where the Germans committed atrocities to the Jewish population, like just breaking shops, breaking windows, killed a couple of people, more than a couple of people, like a couple of hundred, like just like trying to get as many Jews out of the of Germany as possible. And then you got the whole appeasement factor of the West, saying, "Oh yeah, you can have the Dayton land, or you can have a bit of Czechoslovakia, okay." But at the same time, you have like you have what's his name, Neville Chamberlain, who's in the background, kind of going, "Guys, there's something wrong here. Like, we have to stop him at some point." And recently, I think maybe 5 years ago, we found out that appeasement was like the British and the Americans going, shit, we have to do something here. We have to buy ourselves a bit of time. And during the appeasement era, they were like building weapons to fight Hitler. And then eventually they put their foot down with Poland, and then World War II breaks out. And the whole when they take over France, Blitzkrieg, like the Germans are so good at warfare. Blitzkrieg, quickly, you bomb all the military targets, you roll in tanks, the infantry tidies up. It's amazing like how they revolutionize warfare. And then their tanks are so much better than the they've such better tanks compared to the Americans. Like my project at the moment is how the M4 Sherman held up against German tanks. And the whole thing was, go ahead.
Oh, so I'm just curious, Liam, what part of all this situation, because you brought us through kind of the buildup, but what is it specifically about the World War II era that you'd like to experience, and like why is that such a draw for you?
Like I honest to God, the whole thing of like the warfare, and then the whole Hitler came to power, for me is just mind-boggling. Like I love military warfare, and I love like how Hitler was able to twist the minds of the German people into believing stuff like that.
Yeah, so it's really the social dynamics and how people were able to build morale on such drastic degrees. Like,
yeah,
I mean, they're literally having soldiers on methamphetamines to charge. Yeah. Like that's very, very iconic for that time.
Yeah, like it was the first army who used the speed. Like it was a kind of speed, like just to keep the German soldiers going. Like they go for like 3 days nonstop, no sleep. And it's just mental how they're able to like wipe out France within 2 or 3 weeks. Like that was France gone. Like probably the strongest European army in the world wiped out within 3 weeks.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, honestly, that's a genius move. You know, it's always been an aspect of warfare of travel time, water, sleep, food, right? Like, they almost kind of have agreed in the past, like, all right, we're sleeping, tomorrow we'll fight,
Yeah, it's like
pump
with meeting
pump your
the line.
soldiers full of, yeah, and just have them go.
Yeah, like it's just
Oh yeah,
I
big time.
went on a bit of a rant there.
No, you're totally fine. There's been a few today, but I just wanted to clarify because there is a lot to that era of time, and especially speaking politically. So
Yeah.
and I can understand the curiosity to the rise of Hitler to power in Germany, because there's a lot of people that really dedicated full lifetimes of support, and that says a lot about a culture. But when people are put in a bad position socially, that they're also willing to almost do anything to get themselves out of it.
Yeah,
That's the
it's
way
like
I view it.
what the Great Depression was, what, 1920, what, 27,
Like
23?
yeah, late 1920s into the 1930s.
Yeah, like the fact like you need a wheelbarrow of money to buy a loaf of bread. It's like just ridiculous. You can kind of see why they turned to such an extreme, but like it's just kind of shocking that they still turn to it.
Do you have any knowledge on the factor of why Hitler was so fearful of the Jewish people? Did it have to do with the Zionist agenda or anything like that? Are you familiar with that?
All I think I really know from my history book that we studied last year was he just wanted to turn like get an enemy for the German people. He could rally the whole of
It's
Germany
almost
behind.
just random, huh? That's
Yeah,
interesting.
and like he blamed the Jewish population for World War One, like why they lost, because apparently like his whole thing was the Jewish love their money, and that they're stealing the money off the German people,
Hmm.
and that's why like he kind of made that fake idea about the Jewish people to kind of get them to turn against the Jews.
Mm-hmm.
Even like Joseph Goebbels, his Minister of Propaganda, he created a newspaper, and it was the first newspaper ever in color.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, it just like even having a newspaper in color, like you're not going to go into the shop and you're going to pick like the old black and white one. You're like,
Yeah.
it's going to catch your eye immediately.
Well, and like the impact that's going to have psychologically of reading something in color, it's like you're reading some new truth. Look at it; it's in color. That's wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is. I didn't realize that. That makes a big statement, though. I mean, because I have seen the old propaganda, so I guess it does make sense that things were being printed in color at that time.
Oh, and how interesting. My mind keeps correlating what you're talking about as you talk about it to what we're experiencing now. And it's like, it's not a whole lot different.
No,
we've just got a few different propaganda outlets. Choose your propaganda outlet at this point. And
yeah, when it comes to mainstream media, for sure, there's a lot actively always going on, and there's a lot of people that actively stay connected to it, and you can see how stressed that makes them feel. That's an uncomfortable feeling to take on so much information. That's why I've told multiple people before, like, we're in the information age. That's at least the way I view it. And some people refer to a part of it as the glass age, but we're also, I feel like, about to hit a new kind of age, because we're creating new elements. We're creating harder structural materials too.
Mm-hmm.
That, I mean, at a point, we're going to be able to build things we just weren't capable of building before.
Yeah. I think we're gonna, maybe the next stage might be considered the power age. We've been pretty archaically extracting, power. And that's that's going to change. They're like, everybody's freaking out, it's running out. Well, yeah, that's going to be the change though, because there is the ability to harvest power at an atomic level, So it'd be interesting to see what happens from that. But we went off on a tangent, didn't we?
Definitely.
No, it's okay. It's okay. I knew this one was going to be far more than just a single question. It was going to lead us into things. But I wanted to invite Jeff. You're typing a lot in the side channel here. I wanted to see.
Oh, I'm not looking.
What do you?
Oh.
Yeah. What is on your mind, Jeff? You can speak your truth here. What?
Well, there's a lot of the propaganda in the World War II area was meant to direct thoughts in certain directions. It pitted two peoples against each other that were living happily together for who knows how long before that. And some say it was the Zionists that were over and above the German high command.
Interesting.
But they were the ones that were the cabal of Satan worshipers, as you will, and separated from the main Jewish community that followed Judaism. So there were two separate factors, and they didn't like each other. One were ousted, and then they became the world bankers of today, Rothschilds, that kind of thing.
I'm glad you brought up the Zionists, because I think it's a big thing that's not talked about.
Most people don't know the difference between them.
Yeah. Well, you get labeled anti-Semitic if you start talking about it very quickly.
Anything,
and it's interesting that you say that maybe they were behind that, because if they were, it was almost like a really good chess move to give themselves social protection throughout time. Like
and they were like only 5% of the Jewish population at the time, but they were ostracized by the main Jewish community because they practiced things that the rest of the Jewish community didn't want to practice.
Right. That elitist, God guaranteed us we're the chosen people. We're going to be gods over all of you, you slave bitches. Right. Who cares what happens to you?
We're all going to them. Yeah.
Yeah. That's how they look at it. It's scary.
Going back to the Cossacks, actually, there's a point of time what dissolved the Cossack power, because they were going into the Persian territory and pirating things and just decimating where they went. But what ended up breaking them apart was a part of the Cossacks went into Russian society and became Russian nobility, essentially, or they were promised a noble stance, and the Cossacks of old chose to step into the old ways still, and they were literally referred to as the naked ones because they didn't have the armor that the Cossacks of the Russian Empire had access to. They were just essentially the Cossacks were peasantry. They were wild men that went and became free, and free to their endeavors. So I thought that was interesting, because what ended up happening is the Cossacks of the Russian Empire ended up killing the Cossacks. So the Cossacks killed the Cossacks. And then now the modern day Cossack that is recognized with the tall fur hats and everything is a Russian glorified Cossack. So we don't even really fully understand the full dynamic of Cossack society still, other than they had like creeds, like almost like a pirate code, where, and one of their things was not turn a Cossack in. And unfortunately that was broken when the Russians turned in the leader of the naked ones. And that was when they knew that the age of the Cossack was over. And that was in like 1600s.
Wow.
So they ended up surviving all the way to 1920 before the Cossacks really fell apart. But think about it, like that's 300 years that that society still thrived through. And they were remnants of almost the Renaissance. So
that's
it's very interesting, right?
Originally, that was all Tartaria.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Tartars.
He pulled up. Yeah. There we go. That'd be a time to visit.
Yeah, maybe we could do that on another episode.
Yeah.
Oh
Real
yeah,
deep.
no. Ancient history is my bread and butter. I love that kind of stuff. But yeah, not to pull off too far.
On that caveat, I'm gonna exit. It was
Hey.
great to meet you guys, Jeff, Liam, my brother, Apex
No,
man.
thank you. Hey man,
been fun.
we'll meet up again. You'll have to dive in on our next one and join us. We'll have a few other people here too.
Yeah, I will try to do that. This was fun. It was great to meet you guys.
No, I'm so glad you came, Elijah. Have a great day, brother.
You guys too. Be well. Bless.
Yeah.
And Liam, there was a rumor that Hitler escaped and it was just a body double that was killed and given over.
Yeah.
Supposedly went down to Antarctica to the base down there, New Schwabenland.
Yeah. Well, I don't know.
Look,
I know. I know about the theory too, but I don't know either. A part of me is like Hitler was also not in the right mind, and I mean, with that much, and he was
a psycho.
Like, he was pumped on so much stuff at that point.
Yeah,
that's where I'm like, was he even himself at that point?
Yeah. I don't know if you've seen the movie Downfall.
Yes, that's a great example.
Yeah, him like in the bunker, like he's like I think people have seen the memes, even if they haven't seen Downfall, of him giving out to his generals because they've lost so much territory and it's the end of the war and they're going to lose, and he just sits there. The room is silent and he's taking off his glasses, but you can physically see that
his hands shaking. Yeah,
like there's so much anger, but it's also he's used so many drugs that he's not there anymore. He's just a man who's just gone mental at that stage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've seen the memes using that, various memes. It's pretty funny, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. No, I agree. Well, Chad's gonna be in. He's trying to work out a technical difficulty, but since he's not here, I will dive into my point. And my point is on the Renaissance era. Now, I have a few different points I wanted to dive into. A few I'm more knowledgeable on than others. But I'll bring up one. Philosophy of that time was shifting into a more, I think, vibrant sense. Dancing, styles of clothing, a renaissance of, a revitalization of art and bringing in the old with the new styles was occurring. And that's when a lot of famous paintings, like I believe The Last Supper and things of that nature were created within the Renaissance. Now, there's also locations of that time that have a lot of stonemason work that I really enjoy studying. Now, the way they would build structures would take generations at times of stonemasons. So that part always appealed to me, of how they trained and kept this knowledge going between the different teams working on these just great structures. So I've always wondered that, and how that would kind of work between the different languages, the different cultures of that time. Who was helping who, essentially. Although a lot of it was probably Latin-based Italian workers, and what have you there. But another aspect that I think is interesting is the music of that time. And a fun fact I learned about is this was the definitive period when people moved away from pipe organs and pianos and kind of dove into lutes and flutes and things of that nature, the more mobile things. And that was because the technology got better at that time, and they were able to make more intricate designs for musical instruments and even building structures. So I thought that was a very interesting aspect to it. The other part is the trombone. The ancestor to the trombone was born in this time, and that was the sackbut. And I thought that was pretty funny because, it's called sackbut. It's goofy, but it's just
cousin to the saxophone, right?
What's that?
Cousin to the saxophone.
Maybe, but it looks basically like a skinny, slender trombone. It literally is like the two parts, and it has to do with something like the sack or the butts. They're two root words, and it's like two part is what it means, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, that's of an Italian origin, and as you mentioned too, the mandolin and the flutes, but there's a lot of instruments that were crafted at that time. So that would be something interesting to study and see how they built those back in the day. But
wasn't the harp produced right in and around then too?
Harp's old.
Really
if you
old?
think about it. Yeah, if you think about it, I mean, David played the harp back in the Bible.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, harp's one of those things. Yeah, it's not to say there weren't mobile instruments, but I think this is more so to speak on the European side of things, because if you think about China too, they had other things, and we don't even know fully what they had.
Gongs.
And gongs, yeah.
Gong.
I love gongs. Man, I love gongs. That's an obsession right there, hitting gongs. All right. So
a nice brass table that rings nicely.
Right. The other thing I wanted to highlight was the foods of that time. And now this was when Italy started making their staple pastries and started to form pastas and more so shape the ingredients together into what we know today. Now, whether or not I'm trying to think about this. Yeah, I mean, at that time, the Americas were discovered. Yeah, so they would have tomatoes in Italy. So yeah, this was, I believe, the time that the pizza and things like that were starting to be born. So yeah. I think that would be fun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Was the Renaissance, was it just Italy, or was it Europe or the wider world as a whole? Because I know it heavily affected Italy, but I don't know exactly how it affected Europe and the wider world. So
it basically started in Italy and spread its way out. It did affect the other regions inevitably, but most of the cultural renaissance occurred, or like, it's the word I'm thinking of, matured within the Italian peninsulas, like Venice and those types of cities, because it wasn't just Italy directly. It was definitely that region, like Sicilian culture. I don't even fully know, because again, the Renaissance is such a deep period of time. It's something I'm actively wanting to study more. And that's not even talking about the styles and the fabrics, because I do find that interesting. I don't really know much about each individual culture's styles as much as I do about their warfare or just their general way of economics. So that's something I want to get more into is studying the fashions of different eras, because it is interesting in and of itself, because it has to correlate with what they were doing. And also the other part of why I want to study that is because my Nana was into fabrics, and I honestly would love to see why that side of history is so interesting for people to to gravitate towards. Maybe it's just the artistic nature of it, but I know at least when it comes to dyes, some of these dyes of that time were extremely rare or hard to obtain. So
it came mostly from the Silk Road, wasn't it?
yeah,
That was huge then. Like, it was
yeah,
the main link between Asia and Europe.
yeah,
In the
and
Mediterranean,
I mean,
was huge shipping through and into and out of the whole Mediterranean area. So many different products changed hands throughout that whole region. It's amazing that
and
it's
there were
separate
definitely
cultures. It's surprising it's not just one culture. That it's
Right?
still separate cultures. But
no, and there were things produced like in the Mediterranean, dye wise, like the purple from the snails that was produced, but that also
they just
changed
found that
and
again. They just found those.
No, they did. But there's a lot of history for that was lost at that time because the Byzantine culture was pretty much gone. I mean, I don't really know that's the other aspect is how much Roman art crossed with the Italian Renaissance, because I feel like that definitely must have crossed, maybe with the sculpting. I think the sculpting was definitely where it mostly crossed because there was so much left from the Roman Empire, even at that time. But yeah, there's a lot of history to that. The architecture is a whole another shabacle, really. And I'm not an architect, or an engineer, but I do enjoy how ornate and structured these projects were of that time. It really showcases how organized these cultures were within their cities.
It's been rumored that all the spires that you see on all the old buildings were meant to harvest electricity out of the air.
Yeah, no, there's things like that. There's theories.
Free energy devices.
And
the bells were for healing. The pipe organs and all the bells in all the towers, they have healing frequencies.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to say about that.
They've destroyed most of them after World War II. You know?
Yeah. The Americans carpet bombing and the British as well. Yeah.
And then they turned them into shell casings to shoot at each other with instead of healing,
Yeah, it's terrible. It's terrible, man. War has definitely multiple sides to it. And that has shaped the way we interpret the history today. The world wars definitely ruined a lot of that old historical structured, because it stood the test of time for a long time. There's still examples, thankfully, of good medieval cities. I think New Amsterdam's one of them. Can't remember off the top of my head, but I believe New Amsterdam prides itself on having a lot of medieval structures. Venice is also another one. I know that for a fact. Venice has a lot of old stuff. And I don't know, did Venice really get bombed during World War II? I don't think they did much.
No, not Venice, but I remember it was like the Germans, especially in temples, there's a big temple up in one of their mountains, and they just leveled the area. And it was really, really sacred ground, and they just like the whole mountainside, especially the temple, because there's German snipers in there and they couldn't get at them, just leveled the whole temple, which is just like, Jesus. Like, I know it's killing your guys, but like, Jesus, that's such a big piece of culture just gone for that area, and such a big piece of history.
Yeah, that's terrible. really terrible. And at least there's pictures. Like that's the one good thing is technology met at a point where there was some photography integrated with the war.
Yeah, like there's so many pictures of like even just buildings during World War II. Like not even like just even like full houses, like photography is so big, even just near the end of World War One, photography was really certain to blow up.
Oh, yeah.
It was like just everyone's using it then.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think this sets us up to a good transition point. And Jeff, I know you got to head out pretty soon here, but we'll go ahead and ask you real fast your diving depth point. What's something you want to take out of this conversation today?
It was just interesting to hear the different views from each of the guests, especially the Native American culture, that kind of thing. That was interesting to kind of, look at each piece. They're different tribes, but they're all one people kind of thing. And then with Liam in World War II, it's been nice to revisit that. Always good to, remember history. Otherwise, you'll end up repeating it. I enjoyed today's conversation.
I'm happy to hear that. And I think, as you pointed out, history is important to step into. And that's why I don't mind taking a lot of detours for it. And I knew it was going to happen because ultimately we're bringing different perspectives into this world. And I know that the viewers out there, this would be a really good one to see and ask the viewers, even for personal diving depth, what you took out of this conversation and what you really enjoyed. And if there was anything you learned from it, we'll try to get into Liam's point of what diving depth he enjoyed.
I really enjoyed the whole spiritual view on this, of like how the Native Americans view different things, and then how just so many different point of views, and then like Renaissance as well. It was amazing, just like different how like it changed. Like you can see how it changed, like how it set humans up for so many different technologies, and it was really, really, really cool. I loved that little bit. It's like I never thought of that really.
I'm happy to hear that. No, I think it's fascinating to see, what diversity there is and what we're left with today, even from hearing stories of, like I mentioned multiple times in the show, the Cossacks, how there's that Wild West and then there's the Wild East, and these other places that were just also lands of freemen and twists and turns like that. So, and as far as my point for diving depths today, I really enjoyed the coming together on these historical topics and the unfiltered nature of our communications, where we're able to listen to each other and really learn from the various experiences we've had on what we feel are important points to experience. And I think that's important for others in our age demographics, all of us shared, to consider and to think back on, because this is history that needs to be told again, so people can remember on how important it is to work together and how important society is to keep healthy and to always be prepared for a change, because you never know how society is going to shift and start catering towards different groups. You have to be prepared and ready to supply your mental and physical needs in a time of change, whether that be war or a push for a new energy source. And that's what we're at the cusp of in our day, is our resources. We're at a very dynamic time for the power over resources. I think that's going to be a prevalent discussion in the next decades to come. And I wanted to go ahead and close this out with the reflections retreat. We'll go ahead and say, Jeff, do you have any things that you're really reflecting on for the show? Do you think the episode today went pretty well, or do you think there's a point, a new topic in mind from today's show that you'd want us to reflect on in the future?
Well, I like the variety of today's show. It went from, medieval times to World War II to today, and natives before Americans got, the Europeans got here. So, and one thing about that I should have brought up, Russia used to own Alaska up until 1947 or something like that.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Or no, yeah, maybe it was late 1800s anyway. And they sold it to the United States. So imagine if they never sold it to us. Supposedly like $9 billion or something, which is a lot of money back then.
Yeah, well,
it's nothing nowadays.
It could have been very different.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
World would be very different if they still owned Alaska. So they would like to get it back. Sure.
Yeah, I think that's something to keep in mind. Is there's still unsettled regions of the world, and there's still room for those kinds of major changes on the field of knowledge.
And the end of Alaska and the beginning of Russia is basically only 32 miles apart.
Yeah, it's not major at all.
No, in the wintertime it freezes over. You could walk there. You walk back.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. Liam, as far as your point, is there anything you want to highlight, reflecting back on?
I'd actually love to do a bit more on the Native Americans. It'd be really, really cool. Like, if you get your friend over, he'd be amazing to have that. And then I don't know, I love World War I, World War II, so even if we do like an episode or two on that, it'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, we'll look into doing this. Yeah, and I mean, that's the point of the show, right? Like, there's not everyone can have the wherewithal to study all that knowledge and compartmentalize.
Compartmentalize
things like that. That was a major brain fart. But yeah, it's great, and that's also something to highlight. We should. I think this is my reflecting point here, actually, is we should really appreciate our teachers and the philosophers and the knowledge keepers of both our time and times past, because without their hard work and dedication, we would hardly have anything to speak on today about our past, even if that is just an artist in their pottery back in the day. We find a pottery shard now, and we're able to pull that from their culture, their people. So the connection that we have and the bond that we have between past and present, I think, is a powerful thing that should be administered within our education.
And always remember, you can always learn something new, even if it contradicts something you've already learned.
I absolutely agree.
Even just spending 10 minutes today researching something, and like both sides could change your whole point of view on something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this topic really opened my eyes up to broadening my perspective on these different eras, and the point made to study the Native American history, and especially with what Elijah was pointing out, the spirituality of those cultures. That's very interesting, and definitely something that isn't necessarily phased out or disruptive to the daily flow. It's something that correlates directly with our reality. So it is good to know those things, especially as Jeff can probably agree with me here, as a U.S. citizen. It's good to know our country's core ancestry of the land. At least I feel a deep respect to know that, to want to know that kind of thing. It keeps me grounded into trying to take care of the land I'm a part of now. I want to really thank you guys for being here today, and Jeff, I know you got to head out. I really think that this was a great show, and it was a little all over with people joining, people leaving, but you know what? 3 of us made it out at the end. This adventure, we survived this adventure. That's going to have to be our thing.
My last word is just say no to 15-minute cities. Go out to the country and enjoy it.
Yeah, no, and the fun fact to leave you all with, something that I found out is like when I was working for Home Depot, they were like saying like 80 or 90% of all U.S. citizens are 10 miles away from, or 10 minutes away from a Home Depot. I always thought that was funny. I'm like, man, that's a lot of Home Depots. But
yeah,
thank you guys. This has been an intellectual adventure, and we really hope you enjoy it. We'll see you on the next one.